Hello and welcome to Clickbait. I am Matt and today we're going to talk about the biggest photography news in the universe. Yes, the Artemis II mission around the moon, which is, well, putting photography into the news every single day at the moment. Now this is the first mission into deep space in, well, 50 years, over half a century since anyone has been out that far. Well, anyone human anyway. Who knows what's out there already? We don't know, do we? But as you've probably seen all across every bit of media everywhere, there are some incredible photos coming back from space, and the whole technology of how they're taking them and beaming them back to Earth in real time is a whole other video all on its own. It's just fascinating technology. But what is interesting, what has been making a lot of the waves on social media, is the camera choice that NASA made when they sent that mission up. Because you may well have seen this, but they are using Nikon D5s. And you might be thinking this is a little bit odd because this is the most cutting edge possible bit of technology in the universe as far as mankind knows. And they're using cameras that are 10 years old. They were discontinued 6 years ago. So the very youngest of those cameras can't be newer than 2020. So why? Why are they doing that when there's much newer technology available? In a Facebook post before they left, Reed Wiseman called them old school Nikons, but the cameras that him, Jeremy Hansen, Christina Koch and Victor Glover are using are Nikon D5s, tried and tested, if you like. But going back into old pages of Ken Rockwell and stuff, this thing was launched back in 2016 and it's got a 20.8 megapixel full frame sensor. Now that doesn't sound like a lot of megapixels, but it's more than enough for, well, big images, clear images, lots and lots of detail. And the crucial aspect of the D5 is it's very, very good at two things: low light performance and incredible dynamic range. And that incredible dynamic range means it can cope with the extreme darkness, the deep blacks of darkest space and the highlights of a planet or planetary body floating in space and getting the full oomph of the sun in the same image and not blow out one or the other. And of course they are shooting in RAW as far as I can tell. And that works hand in hand with its incredible high ISO. It can be pushed to an astonishing ISO equivalent of 3,280,000. That is just phenomenal. That's basically seeing in pitch darkness and still getting an image. And we've already seen both of those things come together in the new 2026 Blue Marble image. The Blue Marble, of course, is the famous image of the Earth in one shot, taken from far enough away to see the planet without sort of montaging multiple images, just one straight picture. And it was shot originally on an Apollo mission on a Hasselblad on 6x6 colour film. And that's interesting because a lot of people have been, with no knowledge of how the picture was taken or photography in general, criticised the new one, saying, well, how has technology fallen back so far that the new one looks grey and muddy compared to the beautiful bright crispness of the one from 60 years ago? And the answer is, the one taken 60 years ago was shot in full sunlight, but the new one was shot on the dark side of the planet. It was shot at night at 52,000 ISO. Again, a phenomenal number. The fact the camera could take it at all is astonishing. And if you see the side-by-side compared to the Photoshop edited version, it is just absolutely phenomenal to see how the planet looks at night in the shadow of the sun with the rim of sunlight around it. That's the Nikon D5 doing what it does best, working in low light, working at high ISO. There are very few other cameras that can do that well. For reference, the replacement, well, not the replacement was the D6 in 2020. The modern equivalent is the Nikon Z9, and there is a Z9 on board, and that is probably what they're going to be taking to future missions after this one. But that one, the new Z9 with the mirrorless technology, only goes up to 102,400 ISO equivalent, which admittedly is double what the new Blue Marble was shot at the other day, but it's only a fraction of that 3 and a bit million that the D5 can do. Now, I don't have a D5 and a Z9 to compare this, but I have read that if you set them both to that maximum 102,000 of the Z9 and then downsample the file size of the Z9 file down to the equivalent of a D5 file size, the D5 image is still cleaner and less noisy at that high ISO. So it does have that advantage to it if you've got to push it to the absolute extreme. Now you might be wondering, how did Nikon get the gig when Canon and Sony are obviously making very good cameras as well, which are very, very tough cameras too? Now Nikon have been supplying NASA since 1971, and you have to remember that every time you go into space, it's likely to be a non-repeatable exercise, and there is no emergency call out when you get there. If something breaks, either you fix it yourself or it goes in the bin. And so you've got to be using stuff that you know will work and you know you can trust. And think about Nikon D series cameras, all of them, the D1, 2, 3, 2X, 5, 6. You know the phrase tough as old boots? Well, old boots are made out of recycled Nikon D series cameras. They are incredibly tough. If you're putting in nails in your hammer brakes, you can use a Nikon D5. As well as the great image quality, it's very, very tough, and the battery life goes on forever, or so it seems. But because everything in space has to be trusted and proven to be trusted repeatedly, there is a long, slow space certification process which NASA use to make sure everything is going to be perfect. It's like the trusted Omega Speedmaster, which has been going into space since 1963. Like Nikon, Omega didn't pay to have their products on the spaceship. NASA went and bought all of the equivalents and ran lots of trials and then bought the ones they like. And famously, I don't know how entirely true this story is, but the first that Omega apparently knew of it was when they saw the photo of Ed White floating in space with a Speedmaster strapped outside his spacesuit. And ever since then, NASA have still been buying Omega watches, apparently. I think there are some other ones that are also certified as well now, and it's the same with the Nikon cameras. NASA buy their own Nikons. They have had some modified in the past for use outside with spacesuits on and extended backs for like 250 frames and that kind of thing. I don't know if NASA paid for that or Nikon did that for them. And likewise, when they were using Hasselblads for medium format camera, they used the same kind of certification process to make sure everything was going to work in space. But everything going up in the rocket has to be able to survive. It's got to survive the extreme vibrations of takeoff and not shake itself apart. Once you get into space, you've got to be able to cope with the extreme temperatures. It's incredible hot and cold. If you go outside, it's ridiculous extremes of temperature and the vacuum of space as well. Everything has to continue to function. And of course, there's the radiation, which the Nikon D5 has been proven to cope very well with. And it's not so bad in low Earth orbit like on the International Space Station, but the further you go out into space, or once you're out into space, it is a more significant problem for technology to cope with. So with a camera you've never used before, some of the latest modern mirrorless, you may find that it doesn't actually take pictures anymore, or they're all goused up or something. So you need to know that camera is going to take pictures that you can use. So all this takes time, but the D5 has been certified and it has been proven. So Nikons have been in use on the space station since 1999. So that's like 27 years they've been using Nikons on board there. So that's many years previously on other missions. So that's going back from the Apollos into the space shuttle and then into the ISS. And the D5 has been the default camera since 2016. That's 10 years now. But the new mirrorless flagship, the Z9, has been on the space station since 2022, putting its hours in, getting proven to be good or not. But it must be working out relatively well because I have risked one on the Artemis mission. But that is just low Earth orbit, which really is the paddling pool of space travel. It's not had a chance to go into deep space yet, which going to the moon is the edge of deep space. I guess you call it the shallow end of deep space because there's a lot more of it out there. But there is a Z9 on board. Apparently Reed Wiseman did request to take one on board because they are planning to take those on the future missions when they go and actually land on the moon. That was going to be the Artemis II mission, but apparently that's now going to be the Artemis IV mission. They want to do one more lap of the moon to get a bit more low orbit data for the next one. So the Z9 is getting the opportunity to prove itself to ultimately replace the D5, but currently the D5 is the thing they're using, the cream of the crop, if you will. But as well as the cameras, they've also got a number of lenses, not much use without them, but they've had to limit themselves a certain amount to what they can take because weight is critical. Because every kilogram costs thousands of pounds to lift into space, and there's a limit to how much you can physically put up into space anyway. So they have to be pretty picky about what they do and don't take. But the long lenses, as they're calling it, are the Nikon 80 to 400mm, and the short lens is the 14 to 24 f2.8. And incredibly, and I was really quite surprised to see this, they've got what was technically a vintage Nikon 35mm f2 D series, which, you know, I don't think of D series as vintage, but bear in mind that's probably 1990s. That's quite an incredible thing, but that's an astonishingly sharp lens, and if you've got the right picture out the window, then you're going to be needing that. And that's the other thing to bear in mind. They are shooting through very thick windows as well. So that's a real extra bit of a challenge. And these people aren't photographers, they are astronauts first, but they have been trained by some of the best people in the world to train them technically on the equipment and photographically with an eye for a good picture. And Christina Cook has the record for the most hours in space of any woman, and she's taken some incredible pictures on the space station in her astronaut career. So from these guys we are seeing some incredible results. The new Earthrise picture is just astonishing, and it's just breathtaking. The images they're creating, which look like science fiction almost, just a breathtaking look at our universe and our home hanging in the void of space. Now, it's not just the D5s on board. They do though have 10 256 gigabyte SD cards for those cameras, and they're piping stills and video back down to Earth down a laser link constantly. But apparently they're only showing the 1080p maximum at the moment because limited bandwidth, so we'll have to wait for the full 4K video when they land again. But there's 28 cameras on board, and I think 17 of those are handheld. Now, a lot of them, obviously from that list, 11 of them, are fixed mounted cameras that are showing the inside of the cabin, the outside of the spacecraft, and they're streaming constantly back to mission control to give them data and information about what's going on with the craft and the crew. Then we've got the two D5s, we've got the Nikon Z9, and then we've got a whole bunch of GoPros on board. We don't know which model of GoPro, because again, that certification process means that it probably won't be the very, very latest one, but it probably won't be quite as old as the D5, because ones from that era were pretty rubbish. It's pretty much looking through a potato. But that's through a deal with National Geographic / Disney to release a documentary from inside the Orion capsule after they get back to Earth. So that's being used by the crew while they're in flight, whether mounted or handheld, that's them. But in addition to that, and this is really amazing, they've got iPhones on board. Since apparently Crew 12 on the ISS and now on the Artemis missions, astronauts have been allowed to take their own smartphones with them, which is incredible. Now obviously this isn't the same quality as the Nikon, but it gives you real candid moments that you wouldn't get with a big camera. You can stage a selfie or a group shot with a big camera. Obviously it looks great if you do, but there's a thing about having a phone in your hand all the time, or just to hand all the time I should say, which is just instantly available to just click and grab, that lets you take those kind of pictures that are very much in the moment, which you probably wouldn't get with a bigger camera. So this is an extra level of insight into the inside of the capsule and some shots outside. And incredibly, because they've got 600 megabit Wi-Fi on board, that's actually quicker than some places on Earth. That is the 10-year-old camera, the minimum 6-year-old camera that is flying to the moon right now, and the reasons why. But despite the fact it is an older camera, the quality of the images and the pictures they are returning is just absolutely breathtaking. It really is giving us the kind of glimpse into the universe and to the far side of the moon that we've never seen before. Our closest neighbour, the moon. Anyway, thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it, and join me again next time. Thank you and goodbye.